Welcome to Sharing Stories, the Inman First Baptist podcast. I am Jeremiah Childers.
And I'm Kelly Kirksey.
And we're so glad that you're here today. Today we're going to be discussing formative life events and how they have shaped our faith, how they have shaped our life, and how they continue to, we go back to those experiences and see where God has been leading and changing us. As we come together today, our text that we'll be looking at is one I think most people are familiar with. You know, there are certain stories in the Bible where an event has happened in somebody's life and it changes them. We've already talked about Abraham, Moses, as he's out tending a flock and sees a burning bush would obviously be a formative event. There's many in the New Testament, those that meet Jesus is a formative event. And for each of us, our formative events can shape the way that we view God, the way that we view others, the way that we view the church. So today I thought we would look at Saul, who becomes Paul.
Yep.
And we'll look at the story very quickly, but it is one of those stories that it essentially becomes the center of the book of Acts, because this is somebody who has been on a rampage against the early church, but he is a very religious person. So when we look at Saul, sometimes we kind of look at him and say, you know, he's just a bad guy before he becomes Paul, but really he is a very zealous person for his faith.
He thinks he's doing his best.
He thinks he's
doing good things.
He thinks he's doing good things.
He's ridding the world
of what he thinks is danger to the Jewish community.
Yeah, evil.
And he meets Jesus on the road to Damascus, and his life is ultimately changed. And looking backwards in Christian history, it is Paul who essentially leads the church forward after this moment, because he goes to the Gentiles.
Yes.
And it is because of Paul that we're all here.
Yeah, and why we have a significant portion of the Bible.
Yeah, most of the New Testament has been written by Paul, and a lot of our theology comes from places like Romans and other places. So let's look at the book of Acts chapter 9. Would you like to read that for us, Kelly?
I would love to. How far you want me to go here?
Well, just read and then I'll tell you when to stop.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to know. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now, as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The reply came, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, because they heard the voice but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight and neither ate nor drank.
That's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
We'll stop there for a minute.
Pretty big moment.
Big moment. And, you know, think about Saul has been out doing what he thinks is right. He meets Jesus on the road to Damascus, the resurrected Christ. And from that, what he thinks he sees clearly, now he understands he saw wrongly, and he loses his sight. And we can only imagine what those days of not being able to see and thinking about all of your past actions and what does this mean for you. And at the meantime, there is a disciple in Damascus named Ananias. And Ananias has a vision and he says, "Here I am, Lord." And the Lord said to him, "Get up, go to the street called Straight and to the house of Judas. Look for a man, Tarsus from Saul, named Saul from Tarsus." And at this moment he is praying, and he's seen a vision, a man named Ananias come in and lay hands on him so he might regain sight. And Ananias said, "Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And he has authority from the chief priest to bind us and invoke your name." But the Lord said to him, "Go, for he is an instrument that he has chosen to bring name before the Gentiles and kings and before people of Israel." And we've got to understand Ananias, this is part of a formation event for him.
Yeah, how could it not be?
He is told by God to go and to essentially pray over this man so they can get his sight back and that he's going to be instrument for God's people. This story, as you continue to read the story of Saul, who becomes Paul, is one of complete and drastic life change.
Yes.
And most of us, if we think about those formative events in our lives, we may not have had like a Pauline experience.
Right.
There are some that do,
Yes.
but most of us, there has been an event in our life. It could be a tragedy. It could be a celebration-like event. It could be something that maybe didn't happen directly to us, but happened around us.
Right.
It could be a parent's divorce. It could be a loss of a friend. But something's happened that transitions the way we see. I love the image that Paul goes blind to be able to see, because in many ways he was already blind.
Right.
And now he can see after Ananias comes to him. So as we think about some of these formative life experiences, we'll be sharing in our intergenerational group some of these formative experiences. So Kelly, when you think about your life, has there been a pivotal formative event that really changed your life?
Yeah, I think that, as we read through this story, I think I relate better to Ananias, actually, as I'm thinking about, that Paul has this great experience and all of a sudden his entire life shifts, which is always the part of the story that we focus on, because it's pretty miraculous. But Ananias is scared.
Yeah.
He's like, this is not a good person. I know who this is.
Mm-hmm.
I know what he's done. And I don't really want to go talk to him.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, Ananias's whole world shifts.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really get to see the other side of that.
Yeah.
Because Paul is sort of the star in this scenario, in this, through a lot of this section of the book. So,
Yeah.
But I think that, as I think about my life, there hasn't been this one transformative, like, okay, well, someone passed away and then I understood better about like living life to its fullest, or, anything that was specifically like that. But I think for me, when I went to college, I went to Baylor, and there was no reason for me to go to Baylor. It was very far away from where I lived. I knew no one that was there. I did not know a single person that was going to Baylor when I decided to go to Baylor. And I just knew I wanted to go there. And so I went totally alone. And I was very far from my family, and it was a really good experience, but I went there knowing what I believed. And I went there knowing what I thought, and I think when I got there, we were required, Baylor is the largest Baptist school in the world. And you're required to take New Testament and Old Testament, and you have to go to chapel. And as I just delved deeper and deeper into the Bible, it kind of pulled away these layers that I had in my own interpretation of the text and the things that I believed. And I knew that this is how it was, because I had grown up in the church and thought I knew it all. And so when I started taking those classes, I realized how the depth of the text was there, and I can remember one night laying in my bed in my room and thinking, I want to be able to go as deep as I can go. I want to pull back as many layers as I can, but I want the truth, and so I remember thinking like, I'm drowning spiritually, like it's like I've jumped into this river. And this was literally what I thought that night laying in my bed was, I have jumped into a river and I do not know if my faith is going to survive to see the other side. But I would rather ask these hard questions than pretend to know and just believe with nothing, and in the end, my faith was so much deeper. And I remember thinking, if I'm not willing to ask those hard questions, do I really have a faith at all? And so for me, that whole experience shifted the whole way I saw the world, the way I saw God, the way I understood people around me, because my understanding of the Bible was different. My understanding of myself and the humility that it gave me to say, like, you thought you knew.
Yeah.
And, you didn't.
Mm.
And God is bigger than what you think you know. And you may think you understand God, but this is just a small picture of who God is that you can comprehend.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was a huge shift in the way I viewed the world, which I know is a little bit different than some of people's experiences maybe, but for me that was kind of and it has painted the whole rest of my life.
Yeah.
My ministry, the way the way I minister to people, but the way I love my kids, the way I love my husband, there's nothing that, your relationship with God doesn't impact. And so when your relationship with God changes, it changes everything.
Well, as I've been thinking about this for my life, there's a lot of big events that happen. And for me, I try to go back and say, okay, if I could go back and say, what is the starting moment where this happened? Where was God working in my road to find out where I am today? And there's a moment I can always go back to. It was in November of 2002. I'd been at Chapel Hill for my first semester of college, which was going horrible. I mean, I was making bad grades because I was in classes that really in high school I thought I could do well in a pre-med. But I didn't.
Listen, I started pre-med too. And I also had that experience. I was like, this is not going to roll.
So, I'd already by the end of the semester had switched to history as kind of my major. But I was kind of in a bad place. And I kept feeling God calling me. I went to some of the on-campus, ministries. And I was, thinking about, well, do I need to transfer schools? Am I going to be able to get my GPA back up? Didn't really know what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. And I felt God just saying, you need to get into a community. And I kept passing by University Baptist. So I went the first day. And I was able to tell this story at Frank's funeral several years ago. But there was a couple in the church. I went and sat on the back row. And in front of me sat Frank and Jeanette Farrington. And they were in their probably late 60s, early 70s at the time, sweet couple. And they learned my name.
Oh.
And they invited me to come back the next week.
No.
And I came back the next week. They remembered my name. And by the third week, they said, sit with us because you've been sitting in our spot.
No.
And on the third week, they took me out.
They invited you to be like almost a part of their family. They're like, you're sitting in our spot already. You just sit with us.
Well, they took me out to lunch the third week. And by December, I was going out with them every week to eat lunch. And by January, they were inviting me to their family reunion.
Aww.
And it was because of them that I got involved in a Baptist church.
Yeah.
And it was because of them that I got more integrated into the church because they would say, you need to meet so-and-so. You need to meet so-and-so. And by, the spring of that semester, I was going to the college ministry. And it was through that process over the next couple of years that I was baptized. And, I came from a different denomination. And in that denomination, you went to college and learned you could question. I'd been questioning for years.
Yeah.
And in that Baptist church, I learned about Baptist distinctives. I decided I wanted to be a Baptist. And I had no idea in the concept of Southern Baptist, CBF, any of that stuff.
Right.
But in terms of what basic Baptist beliefs are, I was like, I agree with these. Autonomy of the local church, autonomy of the believer, separation of church and state, all of that stuff. And, I joined the church, and from there, I went on a mission trip, and from there, I started to hear God's calling on my life.
Right.
And from there, I went to seminary. From seminary, came to Inman. From Inman, got married. Been here for 15 years, but I always go back, and the formative event was Frank and Jeanette.
Yeah.
If it hadn't have been for two people that were much older, looking at somebody that came 2 weeks in a row and said, hey, we want to take you to lunch.
Yeah.
And they made me a part of their family. They would let me come to their house on Sunday afternoon sometimes.
Yeah.
And just hang out. And I didn't have any support system in college. I had a few friends and I was an introvert, so it was even harder. But University Baptist Church became my home. I was there every Wednesday, every Sunday, and 2 or 3 times during the week.
Mm-hmm.
I actually ended up being called as an interim minister there. And when I came to Gardner Webb, they wanted me to stay. And I said, no, I don't like driving long distances.
No.
But it was one of those, it was just, if it hadn't been for 2 people
Yeah.
that invited me into their life. And I was able to go and tell that story at Frank's funeral several years ago. And there were others in that church, like Ann Smith and several others that invited me into their lives. And it was just, that's where I felt not only God's call on my life to be a follower, a real follower. I'd been a good guy, I'd been to church, but that's where I decided really to be a disciple of Jesus. And that's where I felt the calling to ministry.
Yeah.
And it was a simple thing. You know, it doesn't have to be a Damascus Road experience.
Right.
It can just be somebody inviting you to experience something you need in the moment, which I needed friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
I needed a place to be cared for and prepared for. And that's what church is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it really opened my eyes up to a positive view of church. Because I grew up where church was positive in some ways and negative in others.
Right.
But this one was just a positive experience in church.
Yeah.
And I got to know the staff there, and they were a great staff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a wonderful experience. I hope that lots of college kids can find churches that can reshape and form the way they view church, especially if they've been harmed or been a part of a denomination or a church that's not necessarily been healthy in their theological underpinnings.
Right.
So, when you think about these life experiences, whether it's Paul's, whether it's ours, what have you learned about God through those experiences? You know, when you're able to share your story. Like for me, it was God showed up unexpectedly in a senior adult couple.
Yeah.
You know, most people want to see God in a big way.
You know, I love that story, Jeremiah, because I'm so in for the intergenerational. And look, it is like just your story. That's what it is, you know, knowing someone's name, even if they're not in your own age group or they're not like you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so beautiful.
It's a beautiful story. And I'm trying not to cry thinking about
Oh, I love it.
that. Yeah. But yeah, I think my experience with God oftentimes in my life, you know, even discerning my call to ministry, it was not like a dramatic thing. It was very gradual. But I do remember one moment in college. It was my first of my senior year. I went out and took my Bible and just read in a park. And I just felt like an overwhelming sense of purpose and meaning to seek where God was calling me through seminary.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know it would be congregational ministry at the time. I didn't know it would be, you know, working in churches. You know, it could have been missions. It could have been chaplaincy. It could have been anything at that point. I was just open to whatever it was God was calling. And like Saul, he doesn't understand what's about to happen.
Yeah.
All he knows is that he is getting clearer vision. And I think for us, those formative events give us clearer vision of what life is all about.
Yeah.
And what's really important. Because when I went to college, you know, my primary goal was to be successful and to have a career that made people proud of me.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about being people pleasers.
Yeah.
I wanted to please my parents, my grandparents.
Right.
I wanted to be, you know, successful for that kind of reason. And, you know, the realization was, I really just need to please God.
Yeah.
And and sometimes that can be putting ourselves to the side and saying, well, some of the goals and dreams we had aren't really as important as we thought they were.
Right. Yeah, I think that, you know, in my experience, I was looking kind of at the questions that we have for this week, the prompts, and, you know, obviously my view of God shifted.
Yeah.
You know, when I went to college, just thinking back now, you know, I didn't think women could be ministers. You know, I knew who was going to heaven and hell. And I knew the way you should act.
Well, that's
You
good,
wanted
'cause I
to
was
be a
always
good person.
I was always on the fence if I
Well,
was good
yeah,
enough, and I was
that's
thinking,
right.
God,
I was like, there was mine was pretty secure,
yeah,
but and then I knew, that women, they weren't called to those roles.
yeah,
There was a structure in my mind of how the world worked
hmm,
and the way God worked.
yeah,
And, I had gone actually the summer, my junior year, the summer after my junior year of high school, and the summer before my senior year. Sorry, that's the same summer. The summer after my junior year and the summer after my senior year, I went to a camp for 2 weeks, and it was an apologetics camp.
oh,
And so, for those of you who don't know what apologetics are, it's basically just arguing.
so it's not saying you're sorry.
It's definitely not saying you're sorry. It's proving how you're right.
That's usually what husbands go to.
Well, that's probably, it may have been better if I had learned better how to say I was wrong or I was sorry or build a little humility. But yeah, I went, and for 2 weeks each of those summers, I learned about how you argued your points.
to defend the fact.
Yeah, I was defending the faith that I knew was right.
Mm-hmm.
And how when you went to college, they were going to tell you the wrong things.
Mm.
And you were going to learn the wrong things.
Which is crazy because both of us, I heard, my grandparents and several say, be careful when you go to college.
Yes.
Don't. I found faith in college.
Right.
And it was a beautiful experience. And it was at a public university where
Mm-hmm.
I was in classes that, challenged my perspectives on a lot of stuff, but I grew in faith, and a lot of people do. And it's, sometimes we can be afraid of things that we shouldn't be afraid of.
Yeah, I mean, change is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of like what I was saying with the Ananias piece, where it's like, he says, like, oh, I don't want to go. I'm afraid. And change is scary. And changing the way you view the world
Mm-hmm.
is very scary.
And especially people that you perceive to be an enemy or a threat.
Right. And so, when I went to college, I was just very certain about the way the world worked and the way God worked. And, my issue wasn't that I had been warned
Mm-hmm.
by my camps that I was going to be taught wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was it was in the Bible.
Yeah.
The issue was not that my teachers were teaching me wrong things. The issue was that I was reading the Bible.
Yeah.
And so,
And most of the time in Bible studies, when you really read the text for what it is, instead of picking and choosing or using Sunday school material,
mm-hmm.
you realize how deep the narrative and the biblical story goes. You realize that, it shows much more flaws in people than you realize.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that you take for granted are a little more complicated or a little more in the gray area of life.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the biblical text itself doesn't always agree with itself,
Right.
which gives you an awareness that the Bible isn't one book, but a library of multiple voices that are coming along and saying, this is what God is like, this is what life is like, and this is how we're supposed to live.
Yeah.
And, the more you realize that it's all of those different voices, we can, as people followers of Jesus, say, well, let's look at this through the person of Jesus.
Yeah.
And say, okay, how do we look at it now?
And I think for me, one of the things about that shift that maybe I didn't even realize when it happened was that it did change my relationship with my home church.
Mm-hmm.
When I went back, I became more problematic.
Yeah.
My questions became harder. She's gone to school and now she thinks she knows.
Yeah.
And so it just shifted that whole relationship. And I went in to talk to my pastor at the time about women in ministry, and especially when I started to feel called to ministry, and I remember him saying, he said, it's okay, we can disagree and still be friends. And he was like, but the church is not ever going to affirm your call.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, is that disagreeing and still being friends? Like, it was sort of like, so nothing changes when I come in and I walk out of this place.
Yeah.
And so like our relationship is still fractured.
Yeah.
And not, not realizing that delving into the biblical text, it was going to have with it both an opportunity of this beautiful world to see God differently and see the people around me differently and understand myself better and feel called to ministry and change my life. But then also the other side of that is with every change, there's a grief.
Yeah.
Like when Paul changes, he also excludes himself from the community he was a part of.
He does. And there's got to be a sense of loss.
Yeah.
And
a sense of loss in just not knowing anymore. When he started, he knew where the lines were.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, he's like, oh gosh, everything has become so much more blurry than it once was. And so, there is, and it's okay, like that there's a recognition of that, I knew when I came home from college, and I still was dealing with it. After I graduated, I came home and worked at my home church. I was the administrative assistant there, but I knew long term, I knew all the pastors there. We'd go out to lunch together and I'd ask them questions and we'd discuss and all these things. But I knew long term I could not be there because it was no longer my home, really. And so, there's just, with that change, there's also like a leaving of something else.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part that, Ananias is like, I'm afraid, like my view of the world is going to change. You're asking me to change.
Yeah.
When God says, go talk to him, it's like, you're asking me to step into something that I don't know.
Yeah.
And any step you take is moving away from where you were.
And it's a realization I think we all have during these formative life experiences is you do go from a season of certainty to now a season of change that can lead to some doubt about what's next. But for most people, at least in spiritual formation understanding, is those are the ways that we get closer to having a deeper faith.
Yeah.
And it can mean that we have loss, but we gain some things. In seminary, we talked about having, come to seminary with the suitcase. You get rid of things that maybe you don't need.
Right.
You put new things in, but there's always going to be something that you carry with you.
Yeah.
And, last week we talked about some childhood faith formation. This week we're talking about formative events. Each of those kind of things, there are certain things of my growing up in a Pentecostal church that I still hold dear.
Yes.
There are experiences that I had and people that loved me and cared for me. There are some things that I don't keep. A very judgmental God.
Right.
Not that God isn't a good and righteous judge, but that God's grace is bigger than I knew growing up. And that it covers me in ways that I don't deserve and I can't make it right on my own. And for growing up, it was always a sense of you're never good enough. God cannot love you the way you are. And the more you tried, the more you felt like you were failing. And it wasn't until going to a Baptist church in college that I really understood, the song we sang every week, Amazing Grace, what it actually meant.
Right.
And that is so freeing in that it wanted me to live a different kind of life more. It wanted me not to just follow rules, but it wanted me to follow Jesus. And that's a different way of being and doing church. And it just made me want to love God more because I understood how much God loved me more.
Yeah.
And I hope that people, as you listen to this, that through your experiences, you see how much God loves you. Whether it's a tragic experience, whether it's getting married, whether it's having a child. I mean, having a child's a formative experience.
Yeah, I thought about that when we were talking about formative experiences.
For me, I thought I was pretty selfless until I had a child, and then I realized what real selflessness is.
It's a whole different ballgame.
When you give up everything for another human being, and you try to do the best you can and know that you're not always going to succeed. And how much I love this person and still as she's young, she's going to make mistakes, and how much God watches us and loves us as we make mistakes, but also celebrates when we do the right thing. Those are kind of ways of seeing God in a different way too.
And I think the neat thing about being able to look back and share these stories of these formative moments in our lives is that a lot of times we're pretty far removed from them. And so we can see things now that we did not see at the time. When I came home and I worked at my home church, I don't know how many times I tried to talk myself out of being called to ministry.
Yeah.
Because I was in a setting that said I couldn't be. And I wanted to be part of that setting.
Yeah.
And so now looking back, I can see, how much the church has poured into me. And I can appreciate that, even though I couldn't be part of it later on in life. And I can see that God was shaping me at a very young age through that community and how well I was loved there. Now, had you asked me about that when I was dealing with this as soon as I came back from college and felt very excluded and very shut down, and there was a lot of hurt there, I couldn't say that. But now, being kind of at a distance from it, I can see much clearer where God was working. And so I hope that when we share our stories in our intergenerational groups, it kind of allows us to that freedom to say, okay, like now looking back at this, what do I see? Because it's a different view.
Yeah.
And sometimes if we don't look back at our stories, the only view we have is the one that we had at that moment.
Yeah.
If we don't take the time to say, okay, I'm going to tell this story and I'm going to look back at it from, 10 years down the road, then the only view we have is what we were feeling in that moment, which isn't always fully accurate.
Yeah. Memory is a complicated thing.
Right. Well, in our world in that moment is very small.
Yeah.
And mixed with so many emotions and grief and opportunity and all those things all mixed together. And so kind of looking at a distance can give us just a clearer picture and the ability to see where God was working, where we wouldn't have been able to see that before.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this week, as you go about your small groups, think about the stories that have been formative in your life. If you're not a part of one of our small groups, we'd love for you to think about this and share it with someone. And then think also about the people maybe that were in college with you, your professors, for me, Frank or Jeanette, for others, and Ananias, that helped you in that process.
Or at a job.
Those
can be really...
or it could be in your spouse, or it could have been anybody in your life that...
Or your kids.
Kids, or in the church who helped you through that process. And go back and this week, just thank God for that. Thank God that God was with you, has been with you, and will continue to be with you. Because most of us haven't ended our journey, and there are going to be formative events on the horizon. As we age, there's always something down the road. So continue to be aware that God is working, not just in your past, but also in your present and your future. Have a good week.
Bye, guys.